welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into what I'd honestly call the ultimate intellectual detective story. We're trying to crack the case on the leading scientific theories of human consciousness. Okay, so let's kick things off with what philosopher Patricia Churchland brilliantly calls the grandest question. Out of meat, how do you get thought? I mean, it's a beautifully blunt way of framing what scientists famously call the hard problem. How exactly do wet biological cells produce the subjective feeling of being alive? Of experiencing the color red or tasting mustard?
Section 1. The grandest question. Solving the mystery. To figure this whole thing out, the scientific community isn't just sitting around philosophizing. They're out there actively testing completely different models of how awareness actually originates in the brain. We essentially have two main suspects here. On one hand, we have the conventional view. This treats the brain like a highly complex biological computer, where consciousness is just an emergent property of all that wild computation. But on the other hand, we have this radical, mind-bending idea that consciousness isn't computation at all. Instead, it's a fundamental, quantum property intrinsic to the universe itself. Wild, right?
Section 2. Is the brain a computer? The conventional view. Let's start with the classic, conventional wisdom of modern neuroscience. The foundational idea here is pretty straightforward. The brain is essentially a wet neurocomputer.
Conscious sensory processing actually traces a distinct physical path. Sensory inputs travel from the thalamus, hit the visual cortex in the back of the brain, and then feed forward in a sort of third wave all the way to the prefrontal cortex in the front. This beautifully maps the physical architecture where all that intense biological computation goes down.
Now, the absolutely crucial point here is that in this classical model, consciousness just emerges. It comes from billions of integrate and fire neurons acting basically like tiny logic gates. Under this standard model, each neuron acts as a threshold device. It gets an input, hits a certain threshold, and then fires an output to control your behavior. It's entirely algorithmic.
Part 3. The quantum mind hypothesis, beyond computation. But here's the catch. Prominent thinkers like Nobel-winning physicist Sir Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff argue there's a massive flaw here. Computers don't actually understand anything. Sure, they process information, but they don't experience it. And that observation, well, that leads us down a very different rabbit hole.
They propose a theory called ORC-OR, which stands for Orchestrated Objective Reduction. This is where the strange microscopic rules of quantum mechanics come into play. It suggests that consciousness happens right at the boundary between the quantum and material worlds. It's literally connecting our brain biology to fundamental space-time geometry.
Think about standard quantum mechanics for just a second. You have quantum superposition, where particles exist in multiple states, and entanglement, where they remain mysteriously connected across space. But the key mechanism here is objective reduction. This is the exact threshold where infinite quantum possibilities finally collapsed into a definite material reality. So under the ORC-OR theory, consciousness isn't some outside force causing the collapse of quantum possibilities. It actually is the collapse of these superpositions into reality.
Now, if this sounds a bit like science fiction to you, you should know the scientific momentum behind these quantum biological questions is massive. Just look at the $53,000 prize pool for a recent essay competition launched by the Foundational Questions Institute. To celebrate the International Year of Quantum Science, they're asking the world's brightest minds one deceptively simple, absolutely incredible question. How quantum is life?
Section 4. Microtubules and anesthesia, the quantum hardware. This brings up a pretty massive logistical hurdle. If delicate quantum processing is happening in the warm, wet brain, well, where exactly is the hardware? Because normally, quantum states break down almost instantly in warm environments. Dr. Hameroff realized the answer might actually lie in microtubules. These are the tiny cylindrical protein scaffoldings found inside all of our cells. But inside our brain's neurons, these microtubules are arranged a bit differently. They form stable lattice structures that are perfectly suited to encode memory, essentially acting as isolated quantum computers right inside our heads. And the most brilliant proof of this concept involves something used every single day in hospitals: anesthesia. We know anesthetics turn off consciousness, but they completely spare non-conscious brain functions, like your heartbeat. How? Well, studies suggest anesthetic gases slip exactly into nonpolar, hydrophobic pockets inside these microtubules. When they do, they disrupt delicate quantum resonance energy transfers. Essentially, they selectively turn off the quantum channels, and that halts consciousness.
Part 5, Testing the Theories, a massive collaboration. Meanwhile, the standard computational side of neuroscience isn't just sitting still. They are conducting their own epic tests to pinpoint consciousness directly within the brain's physical wiring. In a massive adversarial collaboration led by the Cogitate Consortium, researchers monitored the brain activity of 256 human subjects. Using advanced electrical and magnetic resonance tracking, their goal was to finally settle a major debate between two standard neurocomputational theories.
And these two theories made completely different predictions. The Global Neural Workspace Theory, or GNWT, predicted that consciousness acts like a spotlight in the front of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, operating in bursts. On the flip side, Integrated Information Theory, or IIT, predicted consciousness is a unified system sustained entirely in the back of the brain, the posterior cortex.
The results, which were published in Nature, were decidedly mixed. They showed evidence for both theories. They found sustained responses in the back of the brain, favoring IIT, but they also found high-frequency oscillations linking to the frontal cortex, which favors GNWT. Because neither theory emerged as the definitive winner, prominent neuroscientist Christoph Koch actually had to concede a decades-old bet about finding the exact neural correlate of consciousness.
Section 6, an unsolved mystery. The search continues. So, what does this all mean for us? Well, whether we're tracking the computational firing of prefrontal lobes or the quantum vibrations of microscopic microtubules, the final, definitive answer to how meat creates thought still remains just out of reach.
But make no mistake, the stakes of this detective story are incredibly high. Understanding this mechanism isn't just some academic exercise. It could literally allow doctors to develop a consciousness meter using transcranial magnetic stimulation. This would let us detect hidden, trapped awareness in completely unresponsive patients, which would profoundly change how we handle critical care forever.
So, I leave you with this to consider. As science continues to adapt the mind, what will we ultimately find? Are we just highly advanced biological computers running software in our neurons? Or is our awareness intrinsically woven into the very fabric of the cosmos, literally orchestrating the fundamental quantum music of the universe? Thank you for exploring the grandest question with me today.